When Annemiek, my wife, and I came here at this place to see if we would sell the house, we had a meeting with the broker who was selling the house. We immediately fell in love with this place. And for sure that had to do with these great lime trees, which reminded me of the Garden of Eden, the tree of life and the tree of evil and the knowledge of evil and good. So we were driving here, and in that time, this is 3 years ago, this region started to give names to the streets and roads. So we were driving the car and Annemiek said, "Hey, look, this is called Route de Bonnemort, the road of good death." And I was just talking to her and saying, if we buy a place, I want it to be a place where I can die in peace. And this is such a beautiful, peaceful place. We immediately fell in love, and then we said yes, of course. That's how we are. Yes!
Cornelis de Bondt, born December 9, 1953, is a leading Dutch composer. He studied at the Royal Conservatory in The Hague with Diederik Wagenaar, Jan van Vlijmen and Bas Andriessen. De Bondt is the spiritual father of important pieces as Bint for ensemble Hoketes, Kakas for large orchestra, Het gebroken oor voor de Schoenberg ensemble, De deuren gesloten voor large ensemble, Grand Hotel voor pianist Gerhard Bauhaus en De tragische handeling voor ensemble Loos and Electronics, to name just a few. De Bondt has also been a teacher on the conservatory in The Hague from 2003 to 2020. This year, 10 years ago, in 2013, I, Bas Andriessen, attended a concert in the Muziekgebouw aan het IJ in Amsterdam, in which a new piece of Cornelis called Das Lebewohl was played by the Radio Chamber Philharmonic. And that concert ended with an action of the composer and students of his to express uneasiness about the development of culture in general and politics concerning art and music in particular. When I visited the composer at his place in The Hague in 2016 to film and interview him about his composition Bint for a 6-film documentary I was making about the legendary Dutch ensemble Hoketes, the composer told me about some of his thoughts and activities against the widespread and also ruling neoliberal politics concerning art. Not only was I impressed by his thoughtful stance, but I also understood immediately that mainstream media would never pay attention to the Bondt's sharp and shrewd vision. So I offered him my modest support. We agreed that I would film him in some of his activities whenever and wherever possible. At a certain point, he was preparing a farewell concert that the Royal Conservatory would organize in 2020 when Cornelis would retire as a teacher there. But, of course, then the COVID pandemic happened and the goodbye concert flopped. I lost contact with Cornelis, but approached him again in 2023 when he was giving a lecture in The Hague. I filmed him there and that lecture. And I heard that in the meantime he had moved to France. When I expressed my intention to finish our film project, he invited me to visit him in his new house in the Dordogne. I accepted this invitation, flew to France in September 2023, and there I had some very intensive interviews with the composer that shaped this rather long film about de Bondt's brave but lonely quest for artistic quality. September the 20th of 2023.
Oh, it's today.
Yeah, that's today. Um, well, we are in France,
Yes.
in your new place.
Yeah.
You live here since?
The end of 2020. So almost 3 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, of course, we're going to have our interview, our conversation about more or less the 10 years that I'm filming you.
Yeah.
But of course, the trajectory of which this 10 years is a part was longer. But one
A
could.
lifetime.
It's a lifetime, really, yes. But one could argue that now, 2023, living in France is more or less the end of this trajectory.
Yeah, could be. We never know. But for the time being, yes.
Because, well, the trajectory that we are going to talk about is your quest for critical thinking about.
The quality of art. So trying to find out if it's possible to formulate criteria for a judgment on the quality of art. And of course, if that criteria are not just my personal views, but that it is broader, at least fundamental, or maybe even universal. And yeah, that's a question. Hence, quest.
Um, but it's also, at the same time, it's looking for thinking about quality, but it's also a trajectory of criticism on politics.
Well, yeah, that goes. Is that a proper English?
Hand in hand.
Yeah, hand in hand. I don't know if that's an English expression, but I think everybody will understand. Yeah, so it has to do with the analysis of art itself, but it's directly connected to judgment of, for instance, education, schools or institutes, and subsidy institutes who also give a judgment on art. And so I'm trying to analyze that. Is it consistent or is it not? And if it's not, how could it be better? How should we analyze and judge art? That's yeah, I've been busy with that for a long time, and it was also part of my job as a teacher, because when you teach students who come with compositions, and of course they want to learn things, then I think about that. So when I have a comment, how is this comment a right comment, or is it a comment that serves the student, or does it serve me, or does it serve the school, or whatever? So those aspects are all part of the thinking, and that's a long process.
You more or less said as a joke, it's a lifetime a thing, but I think there must be some specific moment that you focused on really thinking about this topic, about what is quality in art.
Yeah, well, joke. I don't have a sense of humor, so I think it was very serious. But I have to think of my father now. When he was explaining something, he would always start with Adam and Eve, and so I also do. So it started all in the Garden of Eden, of course, where in the first moment, which in Kabbalah theory is called the pre-messianic time, for instance, the text, the form of the text of the Torah, the holy book of the Jews, had the form of all combinations of the 22 letters of the alphabet. So Aleph, Beit, Gidel until the 22nd Tav. But yeah, in how I see it, that's infinite because you can also have Aleph, 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 infinite. And then all the combinations. Um, in other texts, they refer to Aristotle, who would call it a blank stone or something. So nothing and everything, in the end, you could see as the same. From the moment that Adam and Eve were moved out of the garden, the form of the book of the Torah changed, and then it got the form of commands, prohibitions, life, death, love, hate. So that's the moment where we start to think about quality of things, so of art. So you could say it starts there, but I wasn't there at that time. I'm now here, so it's a regression, maybe. I don't know. In my life as a professional musician, teacher, composer, yeah, it started from the beginning of teaching. I was teaching analysis, and then you think of, so from what point of view do you analyze a certain work? From what criteria? So it's, of course, it started there. Then there was this moment in, it was 2003, 2004, I entered the composition department as a theory teacher. That's a long story. I'm not going to tell that story now. In The Hague, the Royal Conservatory. And I started to make a special class, an aesthetic class, which I called the technique of beauty. So I wanted to find out, is it possible to formulate criteria, judgments on beauty, and is it possible to even think that there is a technique behind it? That was the idea, and I didn't know. I had no idea, but I wanted to find out with my class, with my students. And I did in 2003. I was not in the composition department, but in a analysis class. I tried this out. This what my students later called the beauty class. And so that's an important moment. And then another important moment is, yeah, just a few years after, when the cultural, how do you call that, state secretary of art of of the ministry of the government, they wanted to reform the whole subsidy system of the arts, and especially the stage arts. And then, yeah, they came with all kinds of criteria that I had strong objections against. So I needed also, from a political view, to create these arguments. And yeah, somehow they connected to the aesthetic arguments I was working on, but there became a ethical aspect as well, and it started to mix. So that's an important moment. And then it really went wrong in 2007 when, yeah, that's also a very long story, but a lot of the ensembles of new music were put out of a more structural way of subsidy. Then came this horrible government of Rutte, the first one, where he aligned with a radical right politician Wilders. And they started to really cut on the budget of arts. And then in 2013, I did a, yeah, action, a series of actions actually to fight this, to challenge this from one point of view, but from the other point of view, from strategy, because I thought I'd been talking to politicians and nothing came out of that. Then I thought I should counter them through the juridical domain. So I withdrew my scores. I sued a foundation that had scores of me. I said I want them back. They refused, which I expected. So then I could go to court until the Supreme Court in the end. Because I hoped that from this juridical domain there would be a statement on the, how do you call that in English? Cultural erfgoed, the cultural heritage. Because then with the juridical statement I could go back to the political domain and tell, well, what you are doing is it's completely inconsistent. But of course the judges were not interested in this. But okay, that's 2013. And then, yeah, now we're in 2023.
So you designed more or less a strategy for forcing the Dutch government as representative of us,
For
the
the
people.
parliament, people from the parliament also, because yeah, they were in the debate. Yeah, to think about art and subsidy in a consistent way, which they didn't.
Yes.
But also about cultural heritage. I mean, I remember that, and was a important man from the right-wing liberal party of Rutte, the same party of Rutte, who had published yeah, a letter, an article in a newspaper where he said that art should not be subsidized at all. So it should be handed to the marketplace. But he made one exception, cultural heritage. So he says this painting of Rembrandt or this Roman vase, that should be subsidized because they are important, even if no one is looking at it in the museum. That was in it. So then I thought, okay, that's painting, vase, those are objects. How about music then? Because music is not an object.
Yes.
So that's how I started to think about it. And then I thought, okay, I need to go to court because they need to say something about it, which they didn't. Because they had a law on archive and they just checked if what happened matched what was written in the law, in the archive law of 1995. It was the official name. But that was, of course, about buildings and paintings and objects, and not about, how do you call it, immaterial, immaterial things.
Art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, no one was interested. Really no one. But also not artists, my colleagues, no one. They really didn't care. So I became Don Quixote with my cigar fighting the windmills of Rutte.
Yeah. Um, Part of this strategy, if I'm well informed, because of course I have filmed you and we are going to talk about all these aspects, but part of the strategy was also let's say an alternative, another way of thinking about how the how do you say it?
Subsidy policy?
No, onderwijs,
Education.
education, and your part in it had to function, and you organized all kinds of alternative ways of teaching with your students. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
So I already mentioned this technique of beauty class, where when I started the class, there were new students that would come from all over the world. So I would have no idea what kind of students they were, what their preoccupations were, their talents. So I had to meet them first before I could decide what are we going to discuss in the class. That already was a problem for the school, because yeah, there is a certain room, classroom, and we need to plan this with other teachers and etc. Because I would not have my own classroom, so it would all have to be organized. So they wanted to know how long my classes were, what I was doing, etc., which was impossible. So that was already a fight with bureaucracy. So that's that class. So at some point, I moved out of the school. I went to different places, either at the place of a student who would live somewhere where there was a big space where we could have the class. At some point, we rented a place that was an old school building, and that was not decided what to do with it. So then it's not like squatting, but they would call it anti-squatting. So people could squat it, that it would not be squatted by the real squatters. And then you could rent it cheap. So yeah, we were always and at some point we went to Studio Loos of Peter van Bergen, and we had our meetings there. So then I did not have this problem with the planning department. I just took it out. Yeah, so that's one example. Another example was yeah, laboratory that was also founded with one of my students, Ivan, and what's her name? I'm bad in names. Well, another student, and there we would function like a laboratory. So not give a concert. So now this is it, and I hope you have a nice time. But inventing something and discussing it with the audience, or even the audience would be part of the thing that was performed, and maybe they would not even know their role, but afterwards, of course, we would tell. There would be discussions about it. Then that's later, like in 2011, I started what I called the Atelier with Jeremiah Runnels and Jado Gibson, where we had every Saturday from around 11 till midnight, so really long time, where we would have an improvisation meeting in the morning. That was
students.
those were students,
Yeah.
and Jado Gibson, he was already older and had a lot of experience. He studied with Evan Parker, and so he was already in the improvisation scene, and he would guide these improvisations. And it was not about that everybody was going to be a tremendous improviser. No, it was about forming an ensemble. And if you want to have a good ensemble, people need to listen well to each other. And through these improvisation sessions, they learned better how to do this. And it was not about John who played the bassoon. It was not about the bassoon. It was about John who happened to play the bassoon or whatever. Then in the afternoon we would study, rehearse either existing works or sketches of the students. We also rehearsed Bint, a work of mine, in a completely new setting. And in the evening we would have dinner, and then we would do the technique of beauty class, or we would discuss things that went wrong or should be better or whatever. So there were every week we did this, and it was a group of students between 20 and 30, not only composition students but also classical musicians. There were also a few Baroque musicians from the Baroque department, but also from the Beeldende Kunstacademie, the Academy of Fine Art, that was connected in the overall structure to the conservatory. And even some people from outside who were not connected to the school but who heard about it and wanted to join, and of course they were welcome. And yeah, so like the actions we did with the scores in 2013 where we put my scores and parts in a small canoe and made it sink like a small Titanic. That was done by students of this atelier.
So, in this trajectory, there is also the, well, let's say, uh, the farewell of you as a teacher. I mean, you were preparing in this kind of teaching, in this kind of working, you were preparing a farewell concert that would be arranged, organized for you. But it never happened. The pandemic, of course, happened.
Yeah, the COVID.
Yeah. So then it all silenced in a way.
Yeah, I was gone. And yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
And of course, there was a, I don't want to talk a lot about it, but there was a huge conflict because I had ideas about
Yeah.
how my classes, especially the analysis class, would, and the technique of beauty class, would continue after me, and not in a way that I had a prescription book like this and this and this, but I had a student, Cristiano Melli, whom with I had worked for like 8 years, and he was very well aware of how I was teaching, and especially about this what I call transcendental approach. So when I was analyzing a sonata of Beethoven, it was not presenting, so this is the analysis of the sonata. No, it is always from a certain context, certain perspective, which I was always discussing. I was always explaining what my perspective was and why. And so it was not only about analyzing a certain piece, but also analyzing analysis. So on a higher level,
Yes.
because I think that's what it is all about. So if you know, I was teaching composers. So if you analyze something, you have to know from what point of view am I looking at it, and how is this important to me? Maybe for my composition, because that's what I was. That was also the reason why I brought in the theory in the composition department, because I think music theory should always relate to to your practice. So if you're a clarinet player, it should relate to that practice as a clarinet player. And of course, I'm not completely stupid. There are always a certain aspects that count for everybody. A major third is a major third, and so we all have to learn what it is. But then, what is actually a major third? So if you hit the lowest major third on a piano, so you hear some kind of, or you take the highest one, you bling, or in the middle you hear three completely different sounds. Then if you play it on a modern piano, it's in an equal temperament, and you compare it to, for instance, a pianoforte which is tuned in some kind of mean tone tuning, then again the third sounds different. So there are hundreds of different major thirds.
Yes.
So that determines the context of it. So yeah, you have to somehow relate it. So it's very handy that we all sort of know what a major third is, but it's way much more complicated than what it says in the books that explain two major steps in the scale or something. So I wanted this to be this awareness to be in the teacher, and that I knew with Cristiano would be the case. And then also he knows really a lot on classical music, and his expertise is opera, which I think is an expertise that is not so much was not so much available in our department, not on a really deep level, because he also could make a connection to the the libretto, the story behind it, but also how that is connected to the music. And you know, that's really different than what a normal dramaturge. They just go from the dramatic plot, but no, there is a connection to what is in the music, and he would really would have been perfect for it. And that didn't happen for a lot of very wrong reasons, on which I'm really pissed. But I'm not going to explain this because I don't want to sound like a rancunious figure. But it hurt me really. And then, of course, the COVID came, and then I was out, and that's it.
This way of teaching and this project that you described with Cristiano is was that also, well, I think it was, if I understand what you said right, that was also part of your, let's say, alternative way of thinking about what education should be.
Yeah.
That was also, I think, one of the problems that you had conflicts in the conservatory. And another question with this was this conflict also part of how the politics in art and with the subsidies and what the government wanted of education institutions, was it also part of your critic against the politics that you described earlier?
Yeah, for sure. Because the I think an important moment is 2006, if I'm correct. It started earlier, but the Bologna Court, so the European Union, wanted to uniform the system of education, which also has advantages, so that a student who did a bachelor in, let's say, what in Dutch education is a different system, like on a conservatoire. It's not a university, but that you could do a master on a university. So that's how they invented this system of credit points. But with that came an enormous bureaucratic, highly formalized system. And that is, of course, killing the improvisational aspects of, so reacting on what is happening with students. You know, the students were then regarded as some kind of objects that were all similar, and you put credit points to it. So one of the things that happened is that there was much greater emphasis on what they call courses. And for me, education, true education, is about what Germans call Bildung, forming. So it's much bigger than, you know, this is the major third. Oh, you know, major third, you know, okay, boom, there you have a credit. That's stupid way of. So if courses can be handy. So if you want to know how the washing machine is working, you have these user guides, then you can do a course and then you know how to handle the washing machine. But if you want to analyze a Bach fugue, then a user guide really doesn't help. And it starts to get more and more to go in that direction. Then I found out that students that had learned it this way really had no clue about what was going on in a fugue. They knew some of the terms, but they had no clue what was going on. And also they had not a vision on it. So it's not about that you know yet that you reproduce something I have in my mind and this is what the fugue is about. But you need to have some kind of vision from which you can say something important about this fugue. And that is all disappearing. It's all. I saw it with my son, who did a completely different study on a different school, but all classes were all pre-scheduled on the hour, and it was a really big manual that here you have these books, you have these demands, and really like a manual of a computer or something. And that's how they were educated. and he couldn't do anything with it. So that's really true horror, and that's going to be worse and worse and worse. I saw this happening, and I'm sure at this moment the state of the conservatory, it's already much worse than it was when I left. And I was one of the few that really was going against it.
Yes. So that was
I think
also
they were glad I'm gone.
yeah. So okay, yeah. So that's
I
also
was a
the
pain in the ass.
you are a pain in the ass for the school for the
For the school.
yeah.
Yeah, and of course then they say, yeah, but it's also nice. Cornelis, he is a, how do they call that? Dwarsdenker, someone who thinks askew or something.
Ah,
But that's how do you call it? A compliment to kill somebody. I don't know. There's a term for it, but I don't know it now.
yeah. And um, well, then the pandemic happened
Yeah,
to place it also in time,
yeah.
and that was supposed to be the moment that you would say goodbye, and there was a goodbye concert, a
Yeah,
farewell
that was
concert.
organized
Yes.
in the beginning of April
Of which year?
2020.
Yes.
And then, like a month before, because everything was planned, I was having rehearsals, and there were 4 pieces going to be performed. And then suddenly, school closed, had to close. It was demanded by the government, so everybody had to stay at home. And yeah, then that was it. And then, of course, they said, yeah, but in September we are going to do them again. And then, but no.
So they promised.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, that's how it goes.
Well, that was the definite proof that you were a pain in the ass.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah.
So, well, then, now we're sitting here in 2023, as I said before, in France. You moved out of Holland,
La douce France.
La Douce France.
Douce France. Well,
Is there a connection
with what?
with, well, that you wanted to leave everything?
No, it is going to live in France is an old idea of Annemiek and me.
Yeah.
So we always felt very happy here, happy, yeah, happy. We felt on our ease here in this country.
You came a lot here on vacation.
Yeah, so her parents had a house here, and then we were there in summers, and we could be there for a long time because they were still in Holland, and then the house was empty, so we could stay here. So we brought the children. I remember I one of these years I composed Dame Blanche here, so I took this computer, which was this old DOS computer, brought it there and other stuff, and then in the heat, my fingers were gliding by the sweat from the keys of the computer. But okay, I composed it here.
Here is not this home, this
No,
house.
it's not this house, no. But it's not far, like 15 kilometers. So but it's still Dordogne, but another place there. Then her father died, and her mother had to sell the house because there were debts, so they needed the money. And then we started to rent places here. So we came here, maybe not every year, but a lot, every other year for sure. And then at some point, we always had in our minds we want at some point to be here and buy a house and live here in France. And then, of course, the climate, I mean the political climate of the Netherlands became so much anti-art, and it's completely neoliberal bullshit. Bleep, 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 bleep. That I remember there was an interview with Reimert de Leeuw. That was after these first huge cuts on the budget by this first government of Rutte. And he wrote in the interview, if I would be younger, he was then 70, I would immigrate to another country. So and thought, yeah, I need to go. I don't want to be there anymore. As little as possible.
So there is a connection between
There is
what.
a connection, but it came on top of it. Yeah. But the love for this country was already there. So I didn't come here out of hate. I came here out of love. Yeah.
Okay, maybe to round off this part, do you compose here, or did that also stop?
It mostly stopped, but I did compose here. I have this megaloman, what's that in English? They understand, eh? Project called The Man of Sorrows, on which I started already in the end of the 80s. It's a long story, but it's an opera or music theater, I don't know how to call it. And so I did compose here a small etude, an aria, you could say, which could fit in that opera. And it was performed by Christia, Michael, and uh, Anita Tomaszewicz. She played organ on Cyprus. They both are living there or were living there, and they performed there in some churches. And she's a singer, beautiful singer, really. I was so when I heard her sing, I thought, wow, I want her in that opera. She's really great. And she was doing at that time a study where it was something related to old music. She sings Machot and medieval and Renaissance music, but also performs contemporary music. So she combines that, and she did a study on this subject in The Hague on the conservatoire. So yeah, I meet her there. We had a rehearsal in Loos, and then yeah, that happened. So that I composed, but that's like 4 minutes or something. It's not a big thing. Most of the time, I'm writing texts, either essay-like texts or stories, short stories. And sometimes they are a bit in between. I wrote a long text, which I call The Technique of Beauty, which contains essays, visions and ideas I have on art and this whole subject I'm working on for like 10 years, the judgment of artistic quality. But it has a fictive layer on top of it. So it's in the form of a letter exchange between me and my alter ego, Taunus Haas. And he is a German musicologist, publicist, and he started to write me. And I thought, who is this guy? And so there is this layer where there is something weird in this relation. So that's also worked out. So that's a fictional aspect. But in the meantime, there are topics like translation. That's a big topic. Not only from one language to another, like the problems I all the time have to find a word in English. But also, if you think of musicians performing a score, that's also a translation. There is something on paper, and then you make music out of it. That's a translation, and you can debate it. So you can, yeah, is that good or is it not good? If you compare, for instance, the performance of Glenn Gould of a certain sarabande of Bach and then Gustav Leonard, then they have the same score, the same notes, but you hear something very different. And I know of Gustav Leonard, he really disapproved what Gustav Leonard was doing. Sorry, what Glenn Gould was doing. So I remember this interview on television where he was interviewed at his home, sitting in some kind of chair with a big, how do you call it, the leuning, the backside, but it looked like a throne. Right? And the interviewer was saying, yeah, about Glenn Gould, he was people really appreciate him. Tant mieux. the much better. If you even touch 20% of the music of Bach, you already have a lot. So like this. So he really didn't like it. But still, they perform the same score. So that's translation. You can translate in the language of Gould or in the language of Leonard. Well, that's interesting to think about. So that's one of the topics, but yeah, there are many other topics that I described there. And in the meantime, trying to find out who is this guy on the other hand.
So can I say that you have become a writer instead of a composer?
Yeah, I mean, if the term writer refers to that you write stories, I don't know. I mean, I, and the other, on the other hand, I already wrote texts a long time ago, in the 80s. So I have always been writing text. One of my compositions is actually a text. That's Beethoven is doof. Beethoven is deaf. And it's based on the text of Boulez, Schoenberg er more. Schoenberg is dead. So I translate that text of Boulez to Dutch. And then I wrote, also in Dutch, a text wherein I explain how the deafness of Beethoven was not the cause of the music he wrote afterwards, especially his later music, but that it's the other way around because of the way he started to compose or he developed composing, created his own deafness. And that I wrote using for 70-80% of the text of Boulez. I just changed some things and the content of the text changed dramatically. So sure, everywhere it said Schoenberg in the text of Boulez, I changed it to Beethoven. When he was talking about 12-tone system, I talked about tonality. So that was easy. But there were, of course, also a lot of texts that were just general remarks where he disapproved with something. I could use the text. And only on small parts I had to change it a bit because, yeah, it did get a different content. Then, so the text, I spoke my own Beethoven text, let's call it, on a tape. It was recorded. Then there was an actor, Hans Dagelet, who would uh, speak out the text of Boulez as if he was doing a lecture. So there was this table, and he was sitting there. There was this light, and he was explaining. But at the same time, you hear my text. So it's like a unisono because most of it is similar, but every now and then there are differences. So as an actor, and he was also a very good trumpet player, so very musical. So he could play on a musical level with that. It was really beautiful. And then there was a third element. There was a tape that the former harmony teacher of mine, Ineke Kien, recorded the Largo e Mesto of Beethoven's Sonata, slow movement, and that was performed. And I was sitting behind the piano as if I was performing it. Well, you would not want me to perform any music because that is a disaster, but I was just miming it because there were all these blankets and things in the piano. So if I accidentally hit a key, then nothing would sound, but you would hear the piece. And then the piece, the notes of the piece were sent into a system that I developed for other pieces before, where they would go into infinite reverb. So all the notes of Beethoven were piled up until it became a huge cluster, and also the volume of it would very slowly rise till in the end, it's really a lot of noise. So then in the end, the last phrase of the Boulez text is Schoenberg and more, and Hans Dagelet, he had to scream it, and I screamed it on my tape because I knew that would happen. But so that's a text. And there were more texts I produced. And now I'm writing. Every day I'm writing texts. Yeah.
Okay. To definitely round this off,
Yeah.
now you're living here in France. Does it give you rest?
That's a very difficult question. Because of course in my mind I'm still thinking about what happened, what is going on. I thought I had friends and they, they stabbed me in the back. How is this possible? What did I do wrong? I'm always looking at myself. What's going on? And also art. I'm thinking about art. It will never go back to what it was, of course, but will some of it come back? And then, of course, now we are in the middle of this new development on artificial intelligence. And then suddenly you see, no, it will never go. It will completely go in a different direction. And we have sort of a hinge where it can go, because if you have ChatGPT, if you start working with that, you think, well, is this possible? And it's the beginning. It will be huge. And that will have an enormous impact on art, but also on science, because now they already can do diagnosis for illnesses. If you connect it to robotic techniques in operations, what we have seen in science fiction films, it will go beyond that on a level we have no idea about. So yeah, I'm thinking about that, and then do you get rest from it? No, I become very nervous of that.
What did you say?
Then I'm becoming very nervous of that.
Okay.
So I'm not in a state of rest here. I mean, I'm trying to. I went back to the Court of Eden, thinking I'm back in this pre-messianic time. But now we will go to the time that the Messiah actually is coming back, and then not, as Kafka says, on the last day, but the day after. And that's when artificial intelligence appears to be the Messiah.
I would like to start in, of course, I would almost say in 2013. You already said something about it. The concert in muziekgebouw Het Ei with the scores thrown with
In the canoe.
in a canoe in the Ei, Het Ei. Um, what can you say of this this action you did together with the composers? You had written a piece for what ensemble was it that had played?
That was the Radio Kamer Philharmonie. So orchestra that was also cut. It was their last season, and then they were cut. And also the composer subsidies were cut for the most part. So I called the concert Das Lebewohl, which is based on a sonata of Beethoven, Les Adieux. And one movement is called Das Lebewohl, and that means the farewell in German. So we prepared the concert with 3 more actions. So it was the 4th of actions, with especially with Jedo, Gibson, and Jeremiah Runnels. So the first thing we did was a concert in a building of the University of Amsterdam, because there was this festival on scandals organized by the Concertgebouw Orchestra. And one of the things was a lecture on a Dutch author, Gerard Reven, who did some scandalous things, said some scandalous remarks. He was expressing himself sometimes in an even racist way, so that was scandalous. Um, and then Jedo played a piece there on his soprano sax, and while playing, he had put a balloon on the end of the instrument. While playing, he blew up the balloon, and he was playing the national anthem of the Netherlands, the Wilhelmus. Then, when the balloon was filled and his tune was ready, he put it on the mouthpiece, and then the air was put again in the sax, and then he played it again, but he didn't need to blow anymore because it came out of the balloon. That was one piece. Then, same day, we went to what's that? Stedelijk Museum. That's a museum of modern art, also in Amsterdam. And there we did another piece where Jedo would again improvise on saxophone, but then we had a giant snake, we called it, made of 30 garbage bags, plastic garbage bags, but they were all glued together. So it was one long bag, and there was a motor that filled the thing with air. And then the people sitting there in the hall, at some point, it blew up. They had to put the snake above their heads, otherwise they wouldn't see anything anymore. So that was the second part, and we call it all like a symphony. It was a 4-part thing. So the third part was that evening in the Concertgebouw, where there was a concert on scandals. And the guy who programmed the whole thing, he had called me some months before and said, "Can you do a scandal?" I said, "Yeah, I can do this." It's no problem. So we organized a scandal, and of course they didn't want a real scandal, they want something that was nice. So what we did was, and it was especially Jeremiah who planned that whole thing. We had 2 huge balloons filled with helium gas and connected to an anti-rape alarm. So after the first piece of the concert, so in the time that the conductor was gone and they were putting all new music on the stands, Jeremiah came up with this huge balloon and lifted it in the air, and you hear this screaming of the rape alarm, and the thing was up in the air on the ceiling. And then at some point the orchestra was moved away from the stage because they were afraid maybe this is a dangerous attack, which of course was not at all the case. At some point they managed to destroy the balloon from the ceiling somehow. There are holes in it. It took 10 minutes. The idea was that at that point the second balloon would come, but the pump failed. So the guy who was going to do that couldn't fill the balloon with gas. So that failed. So that was the. Then we were supposed to have a fourth part of our symphony. After the concert, we would have a discussion meeting where we would discuss all the things, but we were thrown out of the building. So they really didn't appreciate it. Well, that's a long story. That was before, and then 1 week later, we did the farewell concert in the Muziekgebouw Orkest. So then we had this canoe which we filled with concrete sand, some heavy kind of sand, and bore holes in it. And then the idea was we put all the papers, all the scores and parts in that thing. And I designed a piece like this that it starts with the introduction of just one percussion player playing 5 gongs, and in the end it remains. And what he does is play all the 5 gongs in consistent order. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 5, 4, 1, 2, 3, 5, 4, 3, 4, etc. Until in the end 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that would take 20 minutes to make the whole thing complete. So it ended again with like 2 minutes of just gongs. And then the students from the beauty class went on stage, and of course the musicians knew and the conductor knew, and they would gently, because they knew we have to be careful with the instruments, and we put it in the canoe. And then came the ritual of they took the canoe like, how do you call it, doodskist, like a coffin on the shoulders, like I think 6 students, and there was one guy also, attendance of the beauty class, who would play on his baritone saxophone some melodies that was derived from the piece I wrote. And then we went outside where there is this huge water called the Ei, and the canoe was put into the water, and the idea was also to set it to fire, but when the canoe went in the water, all the water came in the canoe and we couldn't lit it. But okay, it drowned anyway. So like the Titanic, whirr, there it went. So yeah, that was the farewell concert. Yes.
No one's getting close to you, I hope. É provável que ele fique. De boot is verdwenen. Ik ga u weer terugnemen naar Hilversum. Daar wacht u op van de haven. Ik wens u een ja, heel dik. Mobiel. Ja, het zijn boten. In een boot? Ik vond hem mooi. Ja.
explained in part one that it was an action not to, well, to express some narcissistic hurt feelings or something like that, but it was part of a strategy to get the Dutch government react in this.
So I wanted a juridical approach because I had been attending politicians, a row of them, to see how they would react. They had no ideas about art already for a long time. They didn't care. So I thought, now then it has to come from verdict from court, especially on the nature of musical heritage, because that was what this one petition was pointing at in his newspaper article. And so then I had to, so I announced I'm withdrawing my scores from public space. So then I could sue institutes that had my scores. So I asked the publishing institute Donemus, I want you to destroy my scores. Well, of course they didn't want that, so I had some emails. At the end they did, because they understood it was serious for me. So then I thought, okay, I sort of expected it. So then I went to the foundation that did subsidies for mostly the ensembles and festivals and things like that. Because they also had scores of mine, so I summoned them to either give them back to me or destroy them. I didn't care what would happen, but I want them out of public space. And then they refused. And I expected that. Of course they refused, because yeah, they are, according to the archive law, they had to keep them. So then I made objection, and then I had to challenge them first, which I did. Then of course I lost that again, which I expected. Then I could go to court, to the case law court. When you have a problem with some institute or government or whatever, it's not part of civil law, it's case law. So again, I was in front of a judge, and yeah, of course he also said no, that's not possible, because he referred to the archive law. And I was hoping for that as well, because then I could go to the Supreme Court, the Raad van State. And of course I did the whole thing there as well. And that was disappointing that they again did not go into my motives, where I explained that it's about musical heritage and that the score is something different than if you perform a score. So I tried to explain it to them, and they were completely not interested in that. I had made a plea bargain, because you in a court situation you can make a plea bargain. That means it's relatively short, no longer than 5 minutes, but the text does not have to be known to your opponent or to the judges. So I designed a score, and I read the score, and my daughter Danse filmed the whole thing. And the score explains, because everything that was written for this trial, of course, would go to the National Archive, where also my scores will be, and also this one little score that I was performing. No, not performing, but was explaining. And it says that if you perform the score, and there is a certain ritual with crotales, but that's not the point. It's you go to the archive, get the score, go outside and burn it. That's what the score says. So if you want to perform the score, you have to destroy it.
De paradox van mijn partituren kan doorbroken worden wanneer de raad mijn argumentatie volgt. Hij kan ook in stand gehouden worden in de vorm van een, vanuit de wet gezien, onmogelijk uit te voeren compositie. Er zijn dan twee mogelijkheden. De compositie wordt uitgevoerd, in dat geval verdwijnt de partituur. De compositie wordt nimmer uitgevoerd, de partituur blijft in het archief. De partituur. Honosaker for one performer. Instrumentation. two crotales, one high, one low. Crotales, dat zijn kleine belletjes die een lange doordringende toon maken. The official copy of this score that is kept in the Rijksarchief. One Zippo lighter. Execution. Before taking the score, the performer hits the high crotale 2 times. The performer takes the score out of the archive. Outside the archive, the performer hits the crotale, the high crotale, 1 time. The performer sets the score on fire with the Zippo lighter. Once it is completely burned, he hits the low crotale 3 times.
Then there are two options. Either you do this and the score is performed, but you lose the score. Or you don't perform it and it's forever in the archive, but then the piece is never performed. So it's a paradox. So I confronted the judges with this paradox because I hoped they would start thinking about musical heritage, but they were completely not interested in that. And of course I prepared it with advice of so like a professor of case law in Amsterdam and with the former vice chairman of the Raad van State, where I did the trial, the Supreme Court, and they all agreed with it. They said, yeah, no, you really have a point. And they were really disappointed that the judges of the Supreme Court, they didn't give a bleep. I meant fuck. Fuck them. So yeah, that's the juridical thing. But I lost. So yeah, what can I say?
Yeah, what was the verdict?
The verdict was just a repetition of the case law verdict that the score, trying to get the score out of this institute is not a legal act, but it's a factual act. So with case law you cannot apply to that. That was the idea. And then I thought, okay, if that's true, thinking from there, then I thought, okay, then we have to put all art practice in the domain of the factual act. And that reminded me of a occurrence that Agamben describes in the book The Highest Poverty of the Franciscan order in the 13th century. They didn't want to own anything, so they wanted to live in the highest poverty. But the Pope of that time, John 22nd, he was against, he hated that order. So he came in the end, there was a lot of discussion about it, and then in the end he says, no, there is not such a thing that you can possess because it's consumed in its use. So one of the questions was, does the horse own the grass that he eats? And then the idea is, no, he eats it, so it disappears, it's destroyed. So everything is then brought back to a right. And the Franciscans wanted to not be part of that right. They were talking about what is called factual use instead of a juridical use. But the Pope declared, no, it's a juridical use, and I think that term that was used against me comes from there. So yeah, there I was.
And then those roads were closed.
Yeah, then it was finished. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Of course, there was a second reason that I wanted to take back the scores, because I wanted then to invent a new way of practice, a new way of. So the idea of the score, I tried to change that. So I made a set of pieces which I called sonatas, and I made the pieces with with the computer programs I started making from the 80s, and that's was done with an old operating system called DOS. So everybody that has a computer, most of them don't know the term anymore, but those who do start laughing and say, DOS. Actually, it was a very democratic operating system because all these programs that were designed for it were open. It was open source, so you could add to it, change, and whatever. And when Mac came, then everything was closed. You cannot do anything with those programs. So I called it DOSLab later, and the score is a text file for DOS that my computer system can understand and executes, and that in the end leads to a score. But the actual score is this set of algorithms that are calculated and that lead to a score, and that's my real score.
But what do you mean then by you want to change the practice?
Well, let me explain.
Yes.
I was not finished.
Okay.
So if a pianist wanted, it's for piano, the sonatas. If you want to perform it, then you make your own score.
Yes.
So, and it means I will do the programming, but they tell me what, what should be the musical content of it. And I have, of course, I made of all these sonatas, I made a pilot version. So we had sort of an idea. So then you would take that as an example and then change the harmony or rhythm or whatever, but not the idea behind it. So you would have a similar kind of sonata, but made personal to you as a pianist. So, like, I made a pilot version of a sonata in D, as I call it, which was about D major. And Leo Svisky, one of my students, but also a tremendous piano player, made a different one. And of course, we made it together because I had to do the programming. But it sounds really different because the melodies, the harmony is different. But in the end, you hear it's completely connected. They are connected. So, and yeah, then there are other sonatas which have other ideas behind it. So that was one first attempt to change the function of the score.
Because the score is music, but it's not the music.
Yeah, that's of course the problem and also the misunderstanding often. Like even Heidegger, he has written this famous essay on a work of art. I forgot the real name. I can look it up.
Title. Okay.
The title. I don't know, but it's his famous essay on art. And in it he discusses, at a certain moment, he talks about the scores of a string quartet of Beethoven. So the essence of Beethoven is then in these scores, and he says, yeah, well, they can be somewhere in a cellar, and then the mice eat them, and then they are gone. And that's not what it is about. It's not about those scores. It's about people performing the scores. Yes. And that's what I try to explain to these judges. And they didn't understand or didn't want to understand, I don't know. So that was the second idea I had behind withdrawing my score. So sort of a tabula rasa, start new. And the other aspect, of course, was the juridical research for how should we address the essence of musical heritage. Mm-hmm. Nobody understood what I was doing. Nobody cared.
Nobody cared also on the conservatory.
Oh, yeah, but you wrote a piece again. I thought you were stopped composing. I stopped composing. I never said I was stopped composing. I said I withdrew my scores from public space, and I'm going to reinvent my composing. Nobody cared. Which is stupid, because I told the musicians of the ensembles, I'm going to do this. I'm going to have this fight at the court. It would be good if you would be there. So the only two persons from music domain that were there was one student who actually was not feeling right, and he came from a mental hospital, but he borrowed a nice jacket and a tie. And a former student of mine. So there were two students of mine. But there should have been at least 50 musicians from the ensembles. And they were not there, they didn't care. And then, of course, the people from the government and the institute, etc., they were there because they were, I was attacking them in the court. And the people not being there had a meaning then, because they noticed that, oh, nobody's there, nobody cares. So they could go on with if nobody would have needed to protest, shout, or do it, just be there. That would have been a signal. No, not. And then I knew, okay, it is completely gone. The whole thing we built up from the 70s and 80s is definitively gone. And that's after the concert in Muziekgebouw, Rijmert Leeuw called me from London the next day. And he said, yeah, I have to thank you for what you did. It's a great action. I cannot be there because I have a concert in London, but really good. And then we started talking, and I asked him about why is it nowadays so different? Like in the time, in the 80s, when we built up the ensembles, all these musicians were together and they were fighting together to get it done. And now nothing, nobody cares. And then he said, yeah, that's because everybody is now fighting for his own personal gain, his own toko, as he called it. And also in the 80s, 70s and 80s, they were all connected through Vietnam. There was this horrible war in Vietnam, and that was what bound us together. We were fighting authorities because of this, because of course the official Dutch government supported the attack on Vietnam by the United States. And then, yeah, you had the provost, and you had in Paris, of course, the students at the Sorbonne. So there were all kinds of things happening, and everybody was connected to that, and that's the difference.
So that elan, if I may call it like that, was gone within 10 years.
Yeah, 10, maybe 15, but yeah.
But in a relatively short period.
Yeah, in a relatively short period, and yeah, I guess that happens more often in all kinds of situations. That when you create something and you have to create against a force, against a power, then that is more easy than the moment that you achieved your goals and keep it on the same level. That's really a different matter. That's a different energy. And often that fails. I mean, the Roman Empire is a beautiful example of that to a very large extent. So you build up and then at some moment it collapses. It just collapsed.
But there's also, I can't neglect it, I think. There's also your personal feelings. I mean, were you frustrated, disappointed, sad, angry? Maybe a combination of all these?
For sure, a combination of all these, but I see them separate from my contextual fight. But of course, it happened. Like one of the statements a guy made who was in a commission to cut out all the ensembles was who marches too far along the group doesn't belong to it anymore. And then later the foundation I was attacking opened a blog to where people could react to what was going on. And it referred to that statement, but in another way, like, no, we are going to march front. So I said something about it. Oh, so what changed? And then someone posted, oh, are you still angry, Cornelis? So that was the argument. So that's a fallacy, an emotional fallacy that everybody puts. So yeah, you make it emotional and then you don't need to give an argument anymore. So that I was furious about that, about this stupidity or evilness. It's vile also to react like that. I mean, it could be stupid that someone really doesn't know what he's doing, but it can also be vile. And so that's one aspect. And the other is that I was, of course, really disappointed. And I also became very pessimistic about the future. And that is a turn in my life because I have always been quite optimistic. I remember in 1989 when the wall in Berlin fell and Gorbachev was in power, then I was really optimistic. I said, now we are going to change something. Something is going to happen where the Cold War can end forever and etc. Well, the opposite happened, of course. And then the influence of course, we had Reagan and Thatcher and attempts of Gorbachev and Genscher to change this relation between East and West were frustrated by these neoliberal dickheads. And then we had this internet bubble in the 90s that everybody thought, okay, trees grow into the heaven, which of course didn't. And bam, now here we are. And yeah, technology goes ahead. That's unstoppable. Yes. But it has influences on society where there is hardly any reflection on. Everybody takes it for granted. And that makes me really pessimistic. And maybe I'm a grumpy old man. Also possible. Yeah, I don't know.
Well,
Boomer, they say.
yeah, you're a boomer.
Yeah, so then they also don't need an argument. You just
Yeah.
say boomer and you're free of argumentation.
Yes.
Yeah, unbelievable, the stupidity.
Yeah. Okay, in 2016, this was of course 2013 and the aftermath of it, 2013, 14. I came to see you in 2016 for a collection of videos I made on Hoketes, and especially for your piece Bint. So that's not related to this question, to this matter, but in a way it is, because of course Hoketes was a perfect example of a group that proved that a different kind of musical practice is possible.
Yeah, that's true. And it also proved that it's relatively easy to make it and really difficult to sustain. So they ended after, I don't know, 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah, 10 years. Because it ended and they felt it, and it's very, very honest and sincere. That said, then we stop. That's really great. But it shows this problem that I was referring to. And yes, they had a very specific practice of playing, which was exemplary at that time, for sure. Yeah.
For the interview that I had with you in 2016 about Bint, I remember that you also talked to me. Of course, that wasn't for the interview, but that we talked about all kinds of things that you were doing and trying to get another kind of education situation. You as a teacher with your students.
Yeah.
So then I jumped in 2018 when you were doing, already in a further state of it, but you were doing a project with Monteverdi.
Yeah. So that was a cooperation with the early music department, especially through the head of it at that time, the Johannes Boer. And I had already another cooperation a few years before. That was the Handel project. So I had experience and he had experience with me, and that was, so we wrote with a couple of students pieces for that project. They were performed, and now Johannes came to me because he was referring to this action of me to remove my scores, and he wanted to make an opera about Ariana of Monteverdi, and that score is also lost. Probably, it's very likely that Monteverdi threw it in the Ei in Amsterdam. So there's only one fragment left, and that's the famous Lamento. So then we would make an opera on this stage in the life of Monteverdi, which is actually just 1 year, 2009, when he's writing the piece, and writes it for a singer that was a protege of him, as a young girl of 70 years. I've forgotten her name, but let's call her Maya Verlaag, because
That was the last name.
that was the name I forgot, so
Yeah.
let's say Maya Verlaag. And like 3 weeks before they would have the premiere, she died. And then he had to find another
Vocalist.
yeah, vocalist, but it is of course the story of the Ariana. He had to find another Ariana. That's Theseus who fights the Minotaur, and that's the story. And then you had to find it. And there came, because it was, he wrote it for occasion of a wedding between the, I don't know if it was the son or the daughter, but one of the children of the Duke of Mantua and someone from another part of Italy. And there were all these festivities, and so then he would write this opera. And then there came a group of theatrical people that do street theater. And there was this woman who apparently learned the role of Ariana in like 3 days or something. And she sang it, spoke and to Monteverdi, but she did it as an actress more than as a singer. She could sing, but she there became a completely different expression, and Monteverdi was overwhelmed. That moment, that was the idea of Johannes Boer, is the invention of opera. So, because before that it's about voice singing beautiful, and no, it's about something else. There's a theatrical aspect. And yeah, so it could very well be that he threw away all the rest of the opera, because this is where it really succeeded what he wanted. So that we started to do with the students.
They co-wrote it with you, isn't it? They co-composed.
That was the idea, and some actually did, but others went out, and it was a big mess, I can say. But in the end, we managed to make a score together, discussing it. And again, there, Cristiano was really important, because he understood the problems in the dramaturgy. And he discussed it with Johannes, and that was really fruitful. So then it was performed at some point, several times. What's the question?
Well, my question is, you tried to, well, arrange a new situation, for instance, that you co-composed it.
That's education. So making together something, that's the idea. Yeah, that's the most fundamental way how you can teach, I think.
But it became a mess.
Yeah, of course, but that's part of it. I mean, that's in itself, that's okay, because suppose you have to find solutions then. It's a huge thing. Opera, Johannes also hired a theater group. It's comparable with what Monteverdi had. So 6 Italian people, they had to come here, they had to stay here somewhere, and so it's a huge production. Then we were working with a director, and we as composers couldn't work with that director, and at some point we told John, no, he has to go out. And it happened. He had to find another one. So things like this happened. Then some of the students went out because it took way more years. We started in 2014, and in the end performed it in 2018. But then there were students who were already finished school and were gone, and I had to find another one. And some said, "Yeah, no, I'm going to do other things." So that's what happens.
But from the guys that interviewed together with you, I hope you remember it.
That was Cristiano. Ivan was there, and the guy from Chile, Renan. was also there, I think. So maybe we were, the four of us were there.
Ivan Rehnquist Babinczak.
Cristiano Melli.
Renan Celada.
And they co-composed it with you?
Yeah.
Because I remember that I interviewed about that.
No,
You,
we did.
Paul.
So we had, and sometimes even one would compose a certain layer of music, someone else would add to it. So it was not just I do these bars, you do these bars. It was more complicated.
But what I also remember of the interview that I did with you all was that these guys were really, they were young, but they were really, well, they had some enthusiasm and some political thoughts. They were really going for it.
Yeah. But they were connected to the atelier as well. So and there were political. The atelier was the thing I described earlier. The Saturday whole day working with the improvisation, etc. So like an atelier, a studio where you work together, and of course the students that were involved in it were students that are committed. So if someone wanted to earn some credit points, I say, can I join? I said, no, you cannot join. I'm not interested in you. So it was purely about thinking about musical practice. Of course you want people to write beautiful scores and music and whatever, in whatever form you do it. But you want also that you're aware of the context of what you're doing and the concept of what is the idea behind it. And yeah, then maybe I can attribute a bit to the consistency of all of it. So, of course, I have a role as a teacher. I'm not...
a bypasser.
No, I'm not denying that as a teacher you have a certain role. But on the other hand, there are also things that you do together. That's what I learned from, for instance, Bas Andriessen or De Grijmakers. That was really, or even in music theory, Diederik Wagenaar, he was an analysis teacher. And I had ideas about it. And then it was about my ideas, and he learned from that. That's what he said. So yeah, I think overall, when I look back at teaching, probably I learned more from my students than they learned from me. But that's up to them. I mean, that's a decision also.
Let's talk a little bit about La Tragedia. I'll ask you, how did it all got started, this project?
Well, I wasn't there at the beginning, actually. I got in because in one of the first tryouts, a violinist couldn't make it or something. And then, yeah, I just happened to be at the conservatory at the moment. And then, yeah, they were like, oh, can you play the violin part? So yeah, in the end, I actually was playing the violin part for quite a long period for like a year or so. I was playing one of the violin parts in the end. Well, of course, they found one who was more involved in the actual early music practice. So I'm much more of a classical or pop violinist, so very different. So yeah, then as I suddenly went to this tryout, and then suddenly began going to the meetings and becoming more involved in the whole thing. So yeah, that was kind of. But you were from the beginning there.
From the beginning, yeah, from day one.
1 minute, please. So they had written already several notes when you got in?
No, I mean it was like a tryout of like some ideas that were there, but it was very different from what it's now. Yeah, it changed a lot, I think, and. Yeah.
The libretto was even finished then. No, so we were just trying out sketches.
Because what year did it start?
I don't even know.
I would say 2014.
Yeah, for
2014.
4 years ago.
Yeah, but the libretto we didn't have, I think, until what, 1 year ago?
Yeah.
It had like 10 more characters than it does now. It was like around 18 characters.
But you started before, because the first talk with you to start this opera was exactly after your goodbye.
That's 5 years ago.
That's 5 years ago. So that's when they started, and then I was in the beauty class. So then we were 9 composers, I think. That started so 9, and then we started having a few lectures here and there about early music and the period of Monteverdi and the ideas that to develop a new practice also in the compositional world, which something that you asked about the bond that puts us together, and I think that this is a big bond between us. And then we kept going, and many changes in the libretto, many composers left, many composers were in. And well, now we are here.
And when was it the four of you? Yeah, from when?
The four of us for 1 month.
The four of us, yeah, no, more like 3 months now, no? 3 months?
No, 2 months. We were
I mean,
five.
We were five. We were five for quite a long time, and before that, well, as you said, start from 9. The others kind of went away sort of quickly because they graduated and had to move the country or etc. Or got
The opera was postponed. The opera was postponed a few times. Yeah. So it was supposed to be last year, then it came now. So in this, many people finished the studying, left the country, many people stayed, many people came in, people came out. Yeah.
But Cornelis, I think that I've understood correctly that it originated with you.
Yeah, Johannes asked me not so long after this.
Johannes
Boer, the head of the early music department, who started the whole project. He came to me and asked me to join because he said, "Yeah, you threw away your score, and it's an opera about making Ariana by Monteverdi, but that score is also gone. So maybe that's also somewhere in the eye." So then I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. So we make an opera about how he makes an opera, and that music is gone. So we will write some music about that subject.
And when was it that he asked you that?
2013, I don't know exactly the date, but after the farewell concert, which was in January, so maybe 1 or 2 months after that.
And you liked the idea from the beginning?
Yeah, because when the score is erased, then I'm in.
You feel a bond with...
Yeah, erasing is always good.
Okay, and how... I try to get an image from how does that work with more composers to write one opera. Who will give me some ideas?
A lot of emails, a lot of wine, discussions, fights. They are important. More wine than hugs, cigarettes.
Yeah.
And then no notes are written.
A lot of notes are written. A lot of notes are written.
I think we erased more notes than we wrote.
Oh, for sure.
On what kind of grounds?
And the thing is that the thing started with the attempt of developing or establishing a sort of communal work ideology, but this failed sort of quickly. But it took longer before it was clear that it had failed.
No, I actually don't think it failed. I think that actually what happened was like a filter, and then the ones that remained were exactly the ones that could work in group.
No, but the thing is that it failed, and then as we admit this, we admitted the failure and started on without necessarily considering that alternative, and it just became an intensely communal work.
What would be the failure?
The failure was like the failure is that everybody was bringing stuff, nothing really would work in it, and then finally we kind of we did the separate work of bringing some sketches, and then deciding one, and then eventually
No, I don't see this as a failure. I see more as a filtering. So you see, this is what was happening during all these years. I see more as a filtering. Things were learned, and by this experience we went to a next step, and then things fell away, and people fell away, and we continued until we are here now. So I wouldn't use the word failure. I would more use the word filter.
Okay. But after this kind of discussions, how did it go then? The four of you went home, and then somebody wrote this, and the other wrote that. How was the...
So first you started all to write vocal parts. So you chose the characters and wrote. Then, of course, they were tried out a bit, they were discussed, and then new versions were made. Then we started to write accompaniments to the different characters, and then we had also collective sessions where we discussed. We just played it on the computer, and then we said, "Ah, no, there should be another note here, another note there." That was really the most fun part. Together, deciding on what to do, what to change. So in the end, of course, everything went through all of us, so it's filtered somehow. And I don't think you can really hear, oh, this is him, this is him, this is him. It's really one
No,
thing.
it's in collage.
Yeah. And of course, for the material, we had discussions. What kind of chords to use for which character, what kind of intervals, rhythms, instrumentation. So we made a lot of collective decisions and then went home, worked them out, brought them back together, changed things, discussed them, etc.
So all the four of you wrote for the voices and for the instruments.
Yeah, exactly. And the instrumental part, I think, was much more group work. I felt like the vocal parts was much more, okay, you do this, you do that. We agreed on certain things that would remain common or similar with all the characters, like the type of notation, the use of a spoken voice, blah blah, these kind of things. In the instrumental part, it was moments where we would all go to Cornelis' house and just like take turns and like discuss and all together just changing one note here, one note there. That was kind of in that Cornelis for the instrumental part especially, I had already made like a really huge thing, the what we call the Monteverdi layer. I think that's kind of also a kind of nice comparison with like us, what makes like the whole group together. In the end, we come around you in some way. We're all students of yours and so on, and the music somehow also comes around this layer that he made, and then it kind of taking out parts or keeping one chord here, one chord there, one section here, one section there. Like it's, I think, what gives the whole opera sort of at least the musical part, a sort of unity. Yes. I would say.
Well, to round this off, maybe one more question. You mentioned the word, we try to develop some kind of a communal idea of composing. So is that out of a more or less critical view on the composer as a genius or an individualist, or how should I see that?
In part, yes, and in part also out of a not only I'm part of a critique of the kind of this the
19th century.
the overemphasis of authorship, but also out of a complete carelessness for it. I mean, it's also out of like couldn't care less about that. So it's I mean, it's definitely desacralizing in a way, but it's also genuine atheism, as it's like the church is also just a building. But no, the communal thing I think worked fantastically, and especially I mean what you were explaining, because it was worked on in layers rather than in sections. So it was not like somebody does minute 1 to 20. Because this I think that would have been terrible. I mean, there's some other ensembles out there I know that do that, and it never sounds good. But rather in layers. So everybody gets a character. Okay, we determine certain principles of how to extract rhythm from the text in terms of long and short syllabization. We determine common parts of notation to make it easier for the singers later on, and we determine what are the differences between the characters. Like the vanity is very much more melodic, ornamented, and so on. Reason is kind of steady and ongoing, and things like this. And then everybody wrote that on their own at home. We brought that back to the table, and of course the characters appear here and there and so on. They don't just appear in sections. And then kind of having this is kind of the Lego bits that we then put after each other and into each other, and the dialogues kind of fuse, and then retouch some of the notes there and orchestration. And this orchestration worked very nicely. When kind of like it was very clear when it really started working beautifully, as in I mean, the deadline was creeping up, and it was like, okay, how the fuck are we gonna do this? And like, we have worked for a long time, and we know we can be super slow. That's one thing we know for sure. So how do we just like not make that happen? And then finally, it was just like just meeting up at your place, especially by the computer, and okay, there. Not that note, not that note. Okay, this melody sounds super vain. Let's keep it.
Oh, that is crashed again.
Yeah, so it's crashed. Oh, this sounds like something I would have not have written otherwise or could have imagined. Perfect.
I think we have to cut.
Thank you, gentlemen, and I wish you luck. But what also comes to my mind is 10 minutes ago you said I lost all faith, I was depressed, I thought that it's all over, but in this teaching situation you still had the interest and the...
No, that was still there. So that's 2018, that's true. Yeah, I mean, when I go for something, I just go for it. But of course, I was aware of things getting down. But yeah, like on the Titanic, they kept on playing. At least that's the anecdote. So I was on the Titanic, but I kept on playing the song.
But that was not the impression I had from interviewing you guys. I thought these guys are really, they're not on a sinking boat. They are on a new rocket.
Yeah, no, we were on a sinking boat. But even when you're on a sinking boat and you perform, you suggest you're on a rocket. That's the only, otherwise you cannot perform. So you have to believe what you're doing. And then afterwards, then maybe you think, it was maybe a problem.
Let's move to a year later. I was still, not really following you, but filming some fragments out of this period in which you were trying to change things, think about things, etc. You were preparing also your farewell concert, and I filmed you in The Hague, in the studio, in the piece that had to be performed on your farewell concert called Metamorphose 1.
Yeah. In the meantime, you're skipping one event, that was the Orgel Park.
Oh, I thought it was after. Yeah, okay, that's my fault now.
The Orgel Park was first.
Deus.
That was May 2019, I think, was the performance. So that was another project where I worked with students and composing and thinking and We are in the Orgel Park, Organ Park.
What is it?
Which is an old church. Well, old. It's 20th century, early 20th century. There was a, how do you call it in English? Domine, minister, I think. Protestant priest. He was preaching here and he preached that the snake from paradise was a metaphor. It was not real. So he was thrown out of the religious organization, the synode, and then even he had to be accompanied by police to be able to do his sermons here, Johannes Geelkerke. So this is the church, and now they built in a lot of organs, different organs from different periods, different tunings, and we are going to write one work for all the instruments here. There are also 2 grand pianos, there is a harmonium, there is a portativo, a small organ. Did I forget anything? In total 11 instruments.
Okay, you have explained what kind of building it is, that it's a house for organs.
Yeah, it's a church. It's a church and it functions now as a concert hall with a lot of organs and pianos.
So what exactly are you doing here now, today?
So today we are doing an inventory. So checking out how all organs work, what stops, so sounds they have, what tunings, because they have different temperaments. Like the oldest organ, I don't know if you can see it on the camera up, is a Renaissance organ from the 15th century. So it's really old, and normally if you have an orchestra, then when they tune, you hear the A in the middle of the piano, let's say, and nowadays that's around 440 hertz, but that one is 380 something, so that pitch is much lower. There is another organ at the back which is built in a closet. I call it cabinet organ, but there's an official name, but I forget all the time because I'm getting old. Which has 421, so it's also a bit lower. So we are trying to figure out how if you play one chord, how the different sound is compared to each other, for instance. Then there's another aspect, which is the technology, because 3 of the organs you can connect to MIDI, so to a laptop, and you can make them play from a laptop. So that's a big technological problem we have to solve. And then in the end, we want all the instruments in this hall to sound together, so it becomes one huge monster, which is Deus, God. He is shouting, singing, but also whispering maybe to us, we'll see. But for 7 times 7 minutes, so 49 minutes.
Okay. Prost. You said we are writing a piece. You are writing it with whom?
So with 3 other students, so Jonathan, Sheda, and Edo. And they are around here, but I'm sure you have pictures of them. So yeah, we will write it together. I have, of course, a ground plan to fill in the different layers. It will consist of many different layers, and then we'll discuss what will be there, when, the timing of it, and how will the sounds be, and we'll work on this. And that's what we have to do here to try out different things. So we need to make the ground structure in notes, the score, and then we are going to put on sounds on it. And yeah, that's a lot of experimenting.
And how does the work of co-composing function? I mean, you have your meetings, you discuss how you want to write the notes, and then all the 4 composers go home and do their part, or?
Yeah, something like that. It can be a layer. Like there is one layer which is a melody, a bit in the bass. It has to be composed, so one of them will compose it, and then we'll discuss it, and we'll say, now it should be different or whatever, we'll discuss it. There are very fast high notes that have to be written, so someone else can do that. We'll discuss it, we'll change it. But in the end, we will automate all those layers through my computer system, which I baptized DOSLab. It's an old computer system that no one knows anymore. It's from ages ago. But I have it still at home, and that means that we can try out different versions very fast. Once we have put in the principles, we can change some parameters, and then things can be worked out in a different way. And that we would typically do together, or a few of us listen to it and then discuss it. That's what I also did in a previous project with Monteverdi Opera. And those are very interesting meetings because you discuss and we have 4 pair of ears, so we have different tastes, different opinions. We listen, we hear different things, and we discuss it, and then come to some decision. And when we don't cannot come to an agreement, then I'm the boss. I'm the dictator.
How did the idea for this piece originate?
It was an idea by Martijn Padding. He said, well, why don't you write something for this organ park? Because with the composition department we did several projects here. We had a very good experience. So we went here, talked to the Johan, who's the director here, or whatever, chairman, I don't know what his name is, King. And I discussed my idea and they were very enthusiastic. So now, this was just recently decided, a month ago, I think.
So it was the composer department of the conservatory in The Hague,
Yeah. Exactly.
where you still teach.
Where I still teach for 1.5 years.
Yes.
So this is part of my goodbye.
Because if I'm well informed, but please correct me if I'm not, is this part of, let's say, a bigger project with other pieces?
Well, originally, already earlier, Martijn proposed to do a huge goodbye concert in 2020. That's my last year in our festival of the department, Spring Festival. And I already wrote some big pieces for that. And then Martijn said, well, let's do, how do you say, preview with a different concert here. So, yeah, a bit. But the work stands on its own, although it for sure has to do with the techniques that I used in the other work.
When Martijn proposed to do the piece here, to write a piece for the audience, did you very fastly have ideas what kind of composition you wanted?
Yeah, immediately. So it was like this. So he said, and I said, oh yeah, of course, I will make a huge, big monster immediately. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I'm fast.
But why was that you thought about a monster?
No, you cannot say why, because ideas just come. They are gifts of the divine. So working out plans, designing material, you can just sit at your table and start working. But an idea has to be given to you. So you cannot, if you say, now I want a good idea, nothing happens. So you need to be opened up somehow. So you can do things that you are acceptable for ideas, but you cannot force it. But you can always start to work.
So when you have an immediate idea, as you did for this piece, do you see the entire piece in your imagination then, or is it sound, or what is it?
Yeah, that's very complicated. I think it's a mixture of different senses. So of course it's sound, but maybe the best word to use is energy. I feel some kind of energy. And because when you have an idea, it's not material. It's somewhere, I don't know, probably in the brain. But so then you need to give it shape. And once you write down a note, that's shape. And yeah, that's then the thing. So you translate something that's, I call energy, into shape. And that's not the same, of course. It's a different thing. So then you start to reshape and refine and etc. That's what we'll do together.
Yeah. But I know that I presume that this piece of you, Deus, functions in the context of your critics on art policy.
Yeah. And of course not in a religious way. So Deus is a metaphor for, let's say, true art. It could be true art. So I'm working on a large text to explain what I mean with a true art and a true art practice. But yeah, then it becomes really complicated. I have to talk about Kant, I have to talk about Agamben, I have to talk about the Franciscan order where the monks could not have any possession. But they got a real problem with the curie, the Roman, with the Pope, let's say. Because, yeah, they were living in an abbey, they were using stuff, but they said, yeah, we are not the owner. Yeah, that was very unpractical for Rome, of course. And then there was a huge conflict, a juridical conflict, where they try to find out if you were using something, if you were owning it. So the example was of the horse eating the grass. Does he own the grass? That was what they were discussing. And in the end, there was a bull by the Pope in 1200 something. And so he split the ownership from the use. So then, because they were talking about the factual use, which was opposed to the juridical use. And the Franciscans wanted purely the factual use, without any connection to the juridical. And that fits with the idea Kant has that beauty is not coupled to any interest. And that also fits with his idea on morale, for instance. So if you want to do good, it has nothing to do with the result. Because the result can have complications. So there can also be that you have good let's say good eigenschappen, qualities, like you can concentrate very well, but you can do really bad things with that. But also, he gives the example of someone who sells something and then he gives everybody the same price, which is fair. So if a composer comes there, or let's say a viola player, because they always make jokes about viola players, the viola player gets the same price as the composer. That's fair. Ah, then it's good. No, says Kant, because there is an interest coupled to it, because he wants people to come to his shop. And that's not what it is about. So if you want to do the good, it should be regardless the result. And that's what I'm after also in true art. But then it becomes a really complicated story. But okay, so somewhere there is this Deus principle, but more like an idea, a pure idea, that I think should be behind expressing art. And of course, in nowadays, it's all about marketing, entertaining, getting as much audience, etc. So it's coupled to an interest of making money. That's typical capitalist thinking, and I want to get rid of that. Probably I'm the only one of this practice. Like Satie was the only member of his church. So I'm also the only member of this profane church.
It can be kind of lonely.
Yeah, it's very lonely. But I have nice guys with me now. So we'll work it out.
Okay, to round off this interview, why then does your God in this piece has to sound as a monster?
Well, he will not only sound as a monster, he will also sound as a child, maybe, as an angel, as all the things that humans have, because it's a human God, of course. Gods are always projections of humans. So he has every voice. Like in the opera of Schoenberg, Moses and Aaron, he had the voice of God sounding, and he took 6 singers for it, because he thought, okay, what type of singer should it be? It cannot be just one. So he took 6. So it's a total, something like that.
Big lungs, but not super big. So if you use two, I think if you had all the pedals on, that would also take the air out right away. So that's maybe something interesting to think about. The fact that you slowly open, that these are valves, right? There's no cancel button, so this is ridiculous. I have to do this. You can also do this, and this is what Chelsea does all the time in these organ pieces. This one is much better. You're kind of hacking the organ, so it's not stable, so it's not... You have to experiment. I wrote a piece for this a few years ago where I did that. But I know the organ really well. I know which ones work. I know which ones don't work.
But you're halfway or something.
Yeah, halfway. And you can, if you mix that with a full one, you know. So, brilliant sound. It has a Zetzer, which means that everything, you can program everything. So unlike there, where you have to have somebody help you, this can go for us. And these help organists to just go through their things. So what I was saying about this is that the range is a bit smaller from upstairs.
So
It only goes so C2 to C 4, 5, 6, D6. So you have one octave, missing some notes. The pedals at the lowest one is F2, I guess. This is F3, F2.
But there is no.
So you got the B flat, but then it turns into A, G, F. Of course, it's the last one. Because it's built into the building.
Yeah.
You see, it's inside that thing, so it's already kind of in a horn. You see, it's like on a kind of a horn shape. So the sound comes rocketing out. If you stand in the middle, you'll hear it exactly how. Here you cannot hear it.
this is 1/7 of the complete structure. So it repeats 7 times, and one block is 7 minutes. And it comes from 3 different pulses. So there are 12 here, up to there. There are 8 here, 7 there. So after a certain number, 8 of them, 7 of them, 12 of them, they're together. And this repeats then 6 more times. And it determines what layer is starting. For instance, this is the layer, it's called meta, of the full organs, let's say. And you can see that in the 7 times this structure is played, that sometimes it's a bit different. This is the pulse layer, this dark one. This is the layer of the fast notes. And this is the layer of the chorale. So that's the structure of the whole.
I think we must mention it, is you used a piece of Bach.
Yeah, I used a piece of Bach. I don't have it here. I don't have it with me. So I used actually a chorale prelude called Vaterunser. And then that has 5 layers in it. So there is a canon in the 2 manuals. There is a bass note, slow bass note pulse going on all the time. And then there is, of course, the chorale in fragments that sounds every now and then. And I used the idea, not that particular piece, but the idea. And I used the chorale on which the prelude was based, which is Vaterunser. And I took the chords and I stretched each chord really wide, like I think 28 times or something, some kind of Bach number I used. And then it moves forward through the chord, but it also goes backward, but it goes forward more and goes backward. So it's stretched over the whole time of the whole piece, which is 49 minutes. So every now and then we hear this chorale come out. Sometimes it's together with the tutti sound. It's there, but you don't notice it so much, but then it comes out.
And what was the reason that you used Bach, and specifically this piece?
Oh, just because it's such a great piece.
That's a good reason.
But and of course because of the structure, I could use the structure, and it fit with techniques that I use in other works as well. And Bach, yeah, come on, he's the greatest. And of course organs, you know, and church, that's Bach. Yes. God, that's all Bach. Yeah, the title, it's part of the title. The other part is that it refers to a statement of Thomas of Aquino, which is in Latin, Deus in nobis sine nobis operator. So God works in us without us, which was for him handy, because then the priest in his office, if he was a vicious priest, malicious priest, that did not affect the legitimacy of his office. And then, of course, you can say maybe for art, it works the same. Art works in us without us. That would be really convenient, because then Wagner or Celine or Reeve or now Kevin Spacey, the actor, they do something bad or wrote something bad, but that does not affect their art, because art works in us without us. So that's the title. Yes. Aquino. Because we are losing the two organs, so it's the only organ, and so we are having the first tutti rehearsal. So the first time all organ players and piano players are going through the piece, and this is very exciting because you have to see if they can follow the whole thing, because the MIDI organs are unstoppable. But they all have click tracks, so they hear the clock. And yeah, let's see what happens. Yeah, it was really exciting.
Yeah?
Yeah, it went really well, I think. I mean, more or less like reading the parts. And,
But when you hear it now, you hear it back. Hear it back.
yeah,
Hear it for the
I hear it.
first time, right?
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
in a way different than you expected, or?
No, this is what I had in mind. Yeah. Of course, there are always details that work different than when you're thinking about it. But no, this is what I had in mind. Yeah.
So you don't think you have to do a lot of changes in the score?
No, it's what it is. Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Cornelis, it's right after.
Yeah, a toast to myself
Yeah,
and to the musicians
Wow.
and Trevor Growell and the organ park. Really great.
So
Yeah.
I can hear it. You're very satisfied about the performance.
Oh yeah, yeah. We already noticed during the first rehearsal this will work.
Okay.
So then we had to fine tune things, but we actually didn't do that many rehearsals. And we only did tutti rehearsals, so playing through. So you can do too many of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very happy. Yeah.
Well, I talked to several of the musicians, and they liked it very much. This piece, also to play
Yeah,
it.
yeah, and although it's very hard, zwaar, heavy, how do you say in English? I'm not completely clear now. Like Carlos, one of the pianists, he really had injuries on his finger because he's really with three fingers hammering all these keys. So they are also suffering, but yeah.
Was that a kind of? Did you ask him to hammer the notes? Or?
No, I mean, it's obvious. It needs to be loud, and they understand this by themselves. They know what they have to do because they understand it.
Yeah.
They understand it. So no, I didn't have to ask them.
Okay. So once you said to me, Deus has to sound like a monster. Was it a monster tonight?
In a way, of course, you can think it's God, but God also is a monster, I think. For sure, the God from the Tenach or the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think we can say he's a monster. Yeah. But he's a very interesting monster. And of course, he's also whispering. When you hear these sounds, then he's whispering. And of course, we have this chorale going through it, which is, trial, effort, and failing. Because, it's I don't know the English word of aandoenlijk, but touching or
moving.
Like you try really very hard, but in a way you fail. But it doesn't matter because it's about the effort and not about the goal. So, and of course that is because of the different tunings of the different organs. So you hear that there are these vibrations in the tuning. To get it really straight with all those instruments is very hard. So I like that very much. And of course in the dynamics they cannot go against the big organs. So yeah, every now and then we hear them. And that is aandoenlijk.
About Deus again. It was related to a metamorphosis, as you explained. But was it also part? Do you see it? Although it couldn't be performed over there, of course. But was it also part of your farewell, not of the farewell concert, but of your farewell?
No, not in that sense. It was more part of the future of my new practice. So it was the answer to it. Then the farewell concerts, there also I worked again with students like this piece you're referring to, Metamorphosis 1. In nobis sine nobis, that's the subtitle, in us, without us, which refers to a statement of Aquino, God works in us without us. That's a long story I'm not going to tell, but I like that title very much.
But that was also in Deus, isn't it?
Yeah, so Deus is actually the fourth version. So I have four metamorphosis pieces. And the first one is from 2016 or something. But it's was not completely finished. There were all kinds of notes. But what I wanted to do was working on the sounds with a guy from sonology, Kaan Yazici. So it would be performed, because the instrumentation is flexible. The idea was to perform it with 4 keyboards and then design samples for the keyboard. So if they press one note, you'll hear a lot of notes, sounds. And we were working on that, and we progressed quite a bit with it, and then the whole thing was cancelled because of COVID.
It's better.
The beginning and the end, we did.
And we didn't really finish.
Didn't we?
No.
Oh.
No,
okay.
not really.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm going to take notes on which parameters we changed and to what extent.
Yeah. It's difficult because of the different types of speakers here. So we design it for this, and then we have other speakers, and then it will be different, right?
Well, I can try to kind of like make a master EQ in the output.
Because
More sharper.
yeah, especially in the attacks, I think. Don't you think? Yeah. Because now it sounds more compared to the first time as a guitar nylon plug or something, and it was more metal like the first time.
Yeah. So in the beginning we have the string softer, something like this. Oh, yeah, all together.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. Anything else? I think this is good, right?
Yeah, we can have to look at it later when we hear all four voices, and then check in the balance. But as what I can judge now, it's okay like this.
So string levels go from -10 decibel to 0 decibel, and then I'm going to 1153 again or something there. Yeah, 1153. Okay, so 1153. The strings are louder.
Yeah.
Harpsichord, shall I make it again more clicky?
Yeah. Yeah, because that should be there all the time through the whole piece.
Okay, harpsichord, oscillator, one position. Let's say it goes from something like this. And maybe it can even get louder.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Shall we also maybe we can also include that in the automation, so it starts with or without and then goes. Is it good?
Yeah, well, it depends on if you listen to all four of them.
Okay, so in the beginning, just to check it again, it was like this, with the higher octave not there. Yeah. There in the beginning it's like this. More punchy, not a lot of sustain to it.
Yeah.
Then at the end it turns into this.
Yeah.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay. So with the bass it goes from support level minus infinity to 0 dB. Harpsichord level goes from 0 dB to minus 7 dB. Okay.
So we are designing sounds for one of my farewell pieces, which is called, it's from the series In Nobis, Sine Nobis, of which in a way the orgel part piece, Deus, is the last version. This is the very first, where I started to work with a technique which I call metamorphose. And so the subtitle of this work is Metamorphose 1. And then the Deus will be number 4. Okay. And the whole thing is about morphing. So this piece we are working on now will be performed by 4 keyboard players on keyboards. And we are designing the sounds. So not using existing sounds, faking instruments, but really designing new sounds. And the idea of the structure is it's a 4-part canon. So the 4 keyboards follow in, at least in the rhythm, a very strict canon, always in the same order. And in the notes they play, they articulate a harmony. And I don't know at the moment, because there's clouds in my mind, but I think each block consists of like 20, maybe it's 23, 22, I don't remember, chords that are played around in the canon. So the melodies of the 4 is not the canon, the rhythm, but they express the chords in a block. Then in the beginning of the piece, the whole piece can last like 40 minutes or so. So in the first quarter, in each block, 1 note is changed. So the block is repeated, but 1 note is changed in one of the instruments. In the next block, in one of the other instruments. So after 4 blocks, all the keyboards changed 1 note. And then it starts over and over and over until the last block, which is number 144. So in the first quarter, the changes are only rhythm. So in the beginning, notes are added, or durations are added, very subtle. So maybe an 8 note becomes a dotted 8 note. So when you hear the second block after the first block, I don't think anyone hears the difference, because it's so subtle. And this goes on. But of course, after 3 minutes, you hear, no, there's something changed. But how and where, you don't know. Like an arm of a clock. It's moving, but you don't see it move, but after 5 minutes, it's somewhere else. Then from, let's say, a quarter of the piece, also pitches can be changed. But again, 1 by 1. So 1 keyboard, then the next, then the next, then the next, etc. So that means gradually the harmony is changing from there. And then looking at the whole piece, the beginning, which you could call sort of a Louis Andriessen or Terry Riley like how do you say, atmosphere or music, changed sort of to Bach. So the change of the harmony and the sounds of the last block is really different from the beginning. And now what we are also doing is that there will be a morphing in the sounds. So we now designed the sounds of the beginning and of the ending of the last blocks. And what will happen is that the sounds will gradually morph from the sounds in the beginning to the sounds in the end. So on all levels, rhythm, harmony, sound, there is this morphing. So I think this is then back to hardcore minimalism, because it's completely consistent. Of course, I used my DOS lab again to do it. That's the idea of the piece. And then there is a surprise at the end, but I'm not going to tell.
Okay.
It's the coda.
It wouldn't be a surprise anymore, of course.
No, that's true. So I can tell. But then don't post it on whatever channel you're posting before the concert.
No.
So in the coda, that's after block 144, it's like we have wound up a string, how do you call it, a springveer. It's a string, no? Like of a big clock, and then from the coda we let it go and it goes backwards. So then it goes fast from the last block back to the first block in every level. But like, well, sort of. Okay. And so each block is separated by a grand pause, which the players can time, so like a fermata. And then when they play the next block, they have to have the energy as if they're starting the piece over again. That's also the idea. So every time you begin. So it's really about putting an effort. Starting over. Again. Again. But it leads to something. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the idea.
You hope.
No, that will work.
Okay.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Well, it's a piece for 4 players.
Well, when I wrote it, it was for an open instrumentation, not for the keyboards. And we even rehearsed it in Studio Loos with some of my students, but Peter van Bergen was also there.
Okay.
Because yeah, you can play it with, like there we had the keyboards, of course, saxophone, Peter, Orestes playing a guitar, Abel playing a clarinet. So it could be any kind of instrument, but then amplified, so that we hear it in a pop-like amplification. Then Martijn Padding, he had a nice idea saying, no, well, why don't you make it with 4 keyboards? Because that was clear from the first rehearsals, it's very difficult. When you look at score and you look at the notes, 8 notes and 16 notes, doesn't look so difficult. But to get it really together in the tempo, that's really difficult. And when you have 4 keyboard players, that's more easy than if you have 8 or 10 other players. And keyboards have a similar timing. So then Gerard Bauhaus, he is coaching the keyboard players.
Who are the other 3?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
He's working on who is going to play.
Okay.
So that I don't know. But probably either composition students who are very good pianists or people from the piano department or a mix. I don't know. Yeah.
And when will be the performance?
Of this piece will be the 2nd of April, coming year. There are 2 concerts, on the 3rd is another. And in each of the concerts there are 2 of my pieces. So in the 2nd of April there's also a weird string quartet for strings with gut strings, so from the time of Beethoven. Also in a, probably in 4/15 the central A. Then on the 3rd April there is a piece for 3 sonatas of, for some reason, 4 minutes and 33 seconds each. But they can be combined, and that will happen while pianists play in different halls. So, but they will have headsets, so they hear each other. So one of the sonatas is just a straightforward chorale, very simple, and that determines the timing. So the other pianists, when the 3 of them play together, play on him. That's the idea. But the audience goes to the hall where the chorale piano sonata is played. They only hear that, but they know that the others are also playing. So then, when it's over, they move to the other hall, then they hear the 2nd sonata without the other 2, but they remember, hopefully, the chorale. Then similar with the 3rd sonata, and then in the end, all 3 together, and then you hear the combination. That's the idea. That's one thing. And the other thing is a piece for a large brass section, 5 percussion players, 5 clarinets, that is to say double bass clarinets, 2 bass and 2 normal clarinets, but in a low register, and a singer. So there are two songs, and that's on text by Borges, and it's called The Guardian of the Books. And I really wrote this with Reimer de Leeuw in my mind. And we know he's physically not in a good health, but I asked him to do it and talked a few weeks ago to him for some hours. And yeah, he's going to do it.
So that will be
If the gods allow it. Yeah.
April the 3rd.
And that's April the 3rd. Yeah.
Is it here in The Hague?
So that should all be here in the Schoenberg zone.
All right.
So yeah, there's a lot to do. They're big projects.
Yes. So are these sonatas and all the titles you mentioned, are they all part of the one big piece you're composing?
No, they're all separate pieces. Okay. Yeah. So the sonatas is a project that I wrote as a result of the juridical trials with the fonds, with the Foundation of Stage Arts, which was to find out what is the essence of musical heritage. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to invent a new type of scores, which are computer files. And so the idea behind the sonatas was that every pianist who wants to play one of them has to make his own sonata with the files. The files are commands for the computer to calculate the sonata. So you can change the chords, the rhythms or whatever, but there are some things fixed that you have to use. And so the score is then ASCII file. It's just a text file. But DOSLab translates it into a real score that you can play from. So that was the idea behind that. And I've been working on that for quite some years. It's a separate project. The piece for Rijnbert is also a separate piece. But of course it's related because, yeah, the guardian of the books, you know, there are these barbarians coming, plundering the library. Well, that's what's happening in art. Then the string quartet also is on its own. It's me imitating Beethoven, imitating Bach, writing a fugue. So it's a huge fugue, a grosse fugue. But yeah. And we were working on that, and we progressed quite a bit with it, and then yeah, the whole thing was cancelled because of COVID.
Yeah. Now you live in France. You're not teaching anymore. You're not composing anymore. Is this more or less for yourself? I know you're writing now, so it got a new form, one could say. But is this for you now? How does it continue for you now, your quest? Or do you think, well, I'm too old now for this or that? Or
well, for sure, I'm on the last part of my life. So you know, when I was teaching, I had young students around me, and I had more possibilities to do things because yeah, they had way more energy than me, and they organized things, and yeah, that's gone. So I don't have that anymore. I also don't have my musical practice anymore. That's gone. Nobody is interested in performing my work. So yeah, I'm dedicating now my creative working in texts because I don't need anyone to write the text. I just write them. But like publishing the text, that's a real problem. No, there is no publishers. Oh yeah, let's do this. So then, yeah, I will see if I can find other means to put the text in the world. And I'm not thinking about it. And maybe I do, or maybe I don't. I mean, when I disappear, it's not that the Earth will stop or something. I'm not that. How do you say? The guy who looks in the mirror all the time. Narcissistic.
Narcissistic.
I'm not that narcissistic.
No. But do you see somewhere on this planet, let's limit it to music only, but do you see people that you think, well, we have to follow them, we have to watch them because they can mean something from this position, seen from this position?
I think they are there, but we don't see them. Yeah. Because they are not in the spotlights. Because the spotlights go for the people who already have success. Success is the key, and not a critical mind looking for alternative visions that might fail. So it disappears in the garages or the I don't know what. But I know they are there because I have these students like Jeremiah, Yedo, Ivan, Jerome also, I mean Cristiano, Jonathan. I can give a long list of names that I know are doing things that are really interesting and also fundamental, but I don't know if that will be seen. That's the thing. It needs to be seen, and the whole neoliberal system is not supporting that those ideas. You know, the neoliberal system defends the status quo, and people who criticize or even attack the status quo, they are removed or ignored or what. Then there's another element that we didn't discuss that much, but it interests me, but it also worries me, and that's artificial intelligence.
Yeah, of course.
Because we see that the possibilities are enormous. What I understood of it is that in this process of machines that learn from each other, that in the toename, the increasement of the arithmetic calculation ability, the number of neurons, let's say, if you compare to the brains, even surprised the programmers of this device, that suddenly it could do something like this ChatGPT. They did not expect that it would already have this level. So it's not a linear line. Suddenly it's there. So apparently there is some critical limit that was exceeded, and suddenly it does something. So that means that this could even go much further. And that will have, I'm sure, really great implication for art. For a lot of things in society, but for sure also for art. It will be so refined. It will have the technology goes really bam like this, and then we have a real problem, because then it will also. It's already now, I understood, giving diagnosis in medical affairs. So all these science fiction films that we saw like 30 years ago, 2001, HAL, the computer. It's going to happen.
Okay.
I can assure you, we are fucked.
Okay, Cornelis de Bondt.
Thank you.
Thank you for very much.
Thank you. Have a nice trip home.